Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And indeed, welcome to our webinar today, Contract Management, Operational Excellence, Usage and Practices Research. For those that don't know me, my name is Paul Branch, and I am the Chief Operating Officer here at World Commerce and Contracting. And it's my delight to welcome you to this webinar today. So before we begin though, a few little pieces of housekeeping. If you've attended our webinars before, you'll be quite familiar with these. But you've joined in listen only mode, and that's not because we don't want to hear from you, because we most definitely do. But your line is muted. So the way to communicate with us is through the Q&A tab, the question and answer tab, which is, if anything like mine, is in that black bar at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So please, as we go, please do ask us questions. We've got a really interesting panel today, experts in the field. So now is the time to start asking those questions as we go through our session. We'll take questions as we go because it makes it more interactive, but certainly there'll be a chunk of time at the end for us to answer some of the more substantive questions. So please do keep those questions coming. Slides. Yes, you will get a copy of the slides that we are sharing with you today. And yes, the recording will be made available to you so that you can listen again or indeed join us for the replay. Last but not least, part of the information that we're sharing with you today is the result of research that ContractPodAi has conducted, and they'll be sharing that with you tomorrow along with the slides. So without further ado then, let's move on and introduce you to our panel today. So you're stuck with me, Paul Branch, Chief Operating Officer here at World Commerce and Contracting, but I am delighted to welcome to our stage, our virtual stage today, colleagues who are expert in this field of contract lifecycle management, and particularly the deployment of some artificial intelligence capability. So we're joined today by Steve Rigler, who's Director of Contract Operations at Inmarsat, and colleagues from ContractPodAi, Matt Gould, who's Head of Legal Transformation, and last but by no means least, Charles Dimov, who's VP of Marketing. So guys, welcome to the stage, and I look forward to an interesting discussion today. So Charles, at the beginning, I chatted about the research that you guys have been up to. So why don't you share with us some of the results that you found from your most recent research?
Yes, wonderful, Paul. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And yes, absolutely, I would be delighted to chat with you about the research. So again, just to remind everybody, this research, we're actually giving everyone at the World CC an advance notice. So we're actually launching this tomorrow, and you'll see a press release out tomorrow from us. But we thought, you know what, this is a great opportunity. Let's share this with this group, and who better to kind of focus on some contract management research than the association that's really focused on contract management. So delighted to share this with you all today. Now, the interesting thing is we did conduct some research. It would have been from the April to June timeframe of this past year. That would have been smack right in the middle of the COVID season. And again, with that in light, we kind of said, I wonder what the effect is. What's the impact? And is this kind of one of those turning points? Is this one of those points of inflection, I guess, in the market to say, we all know that, in the corporate in-house legal has been a little bit on the slow side to adopt some new technologies. And so again, we thought, is this that turning point? So again, some interesting research from that perspective. Now, what we're showing on the slide is, 83%. So of the folks that we interviewed, and I think we interviewed somewhere around we reached out to about 4,500 different GCs or in-house counsels, and we were able to kind of make it through to about 53. Again, not a big surprise. In fact, one of the things, of course, one of the challenges of doing research at that time was many phone numbers that you have actually dial into the office. And of course, as you know, most people were not in the office during that season. So it made it a little bit tricky, but we did get through to about 53 folks. And so this is kind of the results from their perspective. And again, all of these were either general counsels or senior in-house counsel. The current state of contracting. So interesting facts here, or stats, were 83% came back and stated that they do not use any form of automation. So no form of legal automation in their contracting process. And then, in fact, the World CC had, in some of your research, Paul, you had there that 81% indicated that after the pandemic, there's an intent to actually start implementing or look at or get moving with some form of legal automation or contract automation. So again, there is that definitely that promise. And I do think that from that perspective, there does seem to have been an impact. There does seem to have been a kind of a little bit of a shakeup, I guess, in the industry to say, hey, this is that turning point. We really do have to kind of get moving on that concept of the digital transformation of getting legal on board in that regard as well. Now, one of the other things that I'll state here, that 83% that you see there that don't use any form of legal automation or contract automation, the interesting thing is both World CC data from one of your research articles, I think came out and stated that 64% of corporations are not using a contract management system or a contract automation system today. And we had actually done some research also back, I think it was last year, that kind of corroborated that. Basically, our research came out to 62%. So again, very, very, tight numbers. So anywhere from 62 to 64% don't have a system. And then, it was interesting to then see that of the lawyers involved, 83% of them weren't using it. So it could be that adoption may have been one of the challenges, because once you get a system up and operating, doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's jumping on board either. So that's an important factor to keep in mind as well. So again, still some
our research, Charles, our research has definitely shown that, as you see here,
yes.
The majority, let's say, of the corporations probably represented on this call as well, have either not invested in contract automation at all, or have invested and been solely disappointed in terms of the return on that investment. Right. I think that ties back to what you just shared around, engagement. It's such an important part of the deliverable. Our research that shows that still the C-suite see material investments in CLM, but then miss out on the value, the return on that investment.
Right.
It is. We'll get into this for reasons in a second, but it is interesting that the flip side of that, though, is whilst there is a small base of current engagement, there is this general recognition that this train is leaving the station. Mm-hmm. You need to be on board because the pandemic has demonstrated the inadequacies of not having a CLM capability of some description.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's actually a little bit surprising that the industry hasn't sped up. But again, that the statistic that you kind of mentioned here, the 81% are getting on board, trying to do the implementation, or taking some kind of action. That again is very, very promising. And again, if you're either in that 81%, good for you, wonderful. Definitely speak to a number of different vendors in the space. If you are in the that smaller percent that hasn't actually gotten started yet, well, the recommendation is definitely, start taking a look at something. Otherwise, as you point out, Paul, you're going to be left behind is basically what, the main factor there. So other stats that we saw here, the current state of contracting itself. So 2/3, and this question, what we specifically were looking at is of the new, how much of an attorney's time, that is in-house attorney's time, is spent on new contracts or managing existing ones. And again, it was kind of interesting to see that you see the two big bars, anywhere from 1 to 20%. So that was about 32% of the audience said that, yeah, somewhere around less than 20% of my time is spent creating contracts or managing contracts. And then 20 to 40% was actually the most popular answer. So about 34% kind of stated that. So again, it's a big chunk of time. Now, it's interesting when you put that into a little bit of context. And again, this is coming from the World CC research. Paul, I think you're quite familiar with this research about, you guys had taken a look at what is the cost of a contract. And I know that's a very broad statement. You know, how do you put that down? But again, the research was fascinating. And as is shown on the screen there, if you haven't read it, you know, definitely pick up your copy because you're all IACC. Or sorry, my apologies.
There you go.
CC.
Find him, find him.
I knew I was going to do that, but anyway, so World CC members, and the research is there for you, but the average contract, the basic contract is $6,900, and that's US. And highly complex contracts, the average came up to $49,000. And Paul, I think you said some really stunning number, or was it Steve? One of the two of you.
No. In a previous life, where we were, you know, multi-billion-dollar contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve, I think you had a similar experience too. Not just the cost of actually constructing the paper, but the bid costs of some of those deals can exceed a million or multiples of millions of dollars.
Yes. Yes.
So when you have a win rate that's, you know, that's south of 40%, that's a material investment for any corporation.
Yes.
So, you know, the challenge is to ensure that those bid costs are minimized, and the role that technology can play in minimizing those costs, taking risk out of that process, is material.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think that's what that was your experience too, right?
Yes. So at least from my side, from the previous bids that I've worked on, the costs can be pretty significant. And remember, those costs are going to go right to your bottom line in terms of the costs that are coming through the business. So obviously, the more bid work that you work on that you don't win is going to be a cost to the business you're going to have to absorb somewhere else. So there's always that balance between determining whether you've got a good P win and P go based upon the cost of actually bidding for something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and all told, I mean, basically that's just driving the point of saying contracts are pretty expensive, and if you're spending that amount of time on it, then definitely, you know, looking for ways to cut that, to use your time a little bit more effectively, to do more for less. I mean, I know that that's out there as that common phrase and stuff. All very important. So good emphasis there. Now, again, on that same line of thinking, again, some interesting more stats from the research. 85% believe that AI-based contract management software would provide a range of benefits. So again, pretty important there that I know that AI is a big buzzword in the industry. It's talked about a lot. It's dropped a lot as that buzzword to say, yes, we have it, etc. Many vendors are out there in the legal tech space where they've bolted on solutions or or just done something with it. In part, you do have to kind of look at this, you know, with a bit of a grain of salt, and definitely do your homework and kind of dig into this and make sure that it is a legitimate, whatever system you are in the market for that you're looking at. You know, make sure that it is legit and that it's not just AI kind of bolted onto the side of a system that really doesn't do much for you. Kind of look at what are your priorities and say, hey, is AI going to be able to help me, and is it going to be able to cut some of those costs, erode into them, because as you mentioned, costs are a bottom line impact. So if I cut costs, that goes right to the bottom line. And there is no way to get a CEO or a smile on a CEO's face faster than to tell them that you're going to increase revenue. Specifically, if you're thinking about, holy mackerel, this came from the contract management team or the legal team is actually contributing to our revenue. Wouldn't that be a nice statement for the company?
But before we leave that, Charles, I
Yes.
totally agree. There's been a lot of hype around the application of artificial intelligence in general, not just as it relates to contracts, but particularly in contracts around natural language processing and machine learning. And so what I keep in my head, and it's a moving target for sure, but what I encourage our members to do is to think of it as human-led, machine-assisted, much more than the utopian, machine-led engagement.
Mhm.
Now, there's some technologies now capable of doing learning unassisted. I understand that, but still, most of our members who have put that toe in the water by applying portfolio analytics in an AI environment, it is still very much the fact that you have to have that human interaction on the back end.
Yeah, for sure. And and one of the things, Paul, that I would again advise is whatever system you're out there looking at. If you are kind of looking at AI, make sure to talk to a variety of vendors, of course, and that's common sense for everyone. But the second thing is, to your point, in terms of whether AI systems will often require some kind of training, in which case, is the vendor helping you with that? If it does require training, or is it on a self-training system? Are there legal engineers who can jump in and be able to assist and say, hey, don't worry about it, we got this. Because again, that can help tremendously. Your teams are extremely important as it is. It's not like people have tons of time on their hands and are twiddling their fingers thinking about, how can I spend my time wisely? That's not the issue. The issue is how do I bring on a system that can help that team get more effective, drive more impact and just be more efficient. And if the vendor can help, then ask for it. Ask them what are they doing to help.
And I think it's worth, let's be real about this for a moment. The AI, at least I don't think it's going to take my job for a number of years. The AI there is powered to enable us to create more time in our day-to-day roles to provide strategic value-add services.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about how we've kind of used that AI, but we're not using it to be pushing the forefront of the business for new sales. We're using it as an assistance to us versus the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think people need to be a bit realistic about what the capabilities of an AI machine can do at the current time period.
Yeah.
So that's a great segue, Steve. Let's look at the benefits that the report that ContractPodAi did. But before we do that, let's be a bit cheeky and let's ask our audience to see what they think are the most significant benefits of contract management. So the poll's open now. If you've been on these things before, it's point and click. You get one vote. So please do feel free to vote. So what do you think is the most important benefit of a contract management system? 1, frees up time for other tasks. 2, alerts to contract deadlines and timelines are automatically generated. It allows access to contracts from anywhere, an important element of something that we've seen post-pandemic. Improves quality of contracts through things like risk determination or something else. So if you'd just like to complete your voting, and Carla, let's close the poll and see how we're doing. Now this is interesting. Certainly, one of the key, in fact, the most significant benefit is time saving.
Yes.
So we'll see if that's reflected in your research, and then the next one down is so we've got a cost to serve sort of benefit at the top there, and then a cost of quality improvement opportunity in 28% there. So guys, Matt, is this something that you would have expected, or is this not what you would have seen?
Well, this speaks a lot to my own experience. I was a general counsel for EMEA for Telstra before I joined, and also other telcos before I joined ContractPod recently. And the biggest thing that my team had was that sometimes dealing with low value contracts was actually very painful. It took up an awful lot of time, created a lot of muck in the system, and stopped them from doing the tasks that they really want to do. For example, the bid work, for example, giving the advice. So I think this really speaks to, I think, what it always is about to me is about work-life balance. And you can use contract management systems really to prioritize because if you can actually get the low value work down, I think it just makes a huge difference to everyone. What I think is also very interesting is when I talk to GCs, the quality of the contracts is, and it's very interesting that that's sort of the second score here, 28%, is that risk determination and the quality. And if you're a GC, you want to ensure that contracts, and if you might have a global legal team, you're dealing in various different jurisdictions around the world, having that confidence that there is a consistency being applied on a global level when you have multiple different sales teams, multiple different regions, and by having a little bit of AI within the system to give you that certainty can be very good. But obviously, I know from as a GC myself, I'm not always so bothered about the fact that my teams are working very hard, whereas the lawyers themselves want to free the time up so they can focus on the high value work. So I think that is, I would say, so I think different lawyers, different parts of businesses do see things differently, but no, this speaks to me very much. I was surprised though, if I may, just that the allowing access to contracts from anywhere, because I think in the pandemic, that is something that we've seen, being able to make sure you can access contract repositories in a, wherever, when you're working from home, when you're on the move. It's something that I would have thought would have been more interest to people, but perhaps people are managing to work from home better than some of my friends.
Okay, so that's a poll of our audience today. So
Yes.
so Charles, share with us, if you wouldn't mind, the results of your research.
So survey says the benefits of the AI contract management system. In fact, that was interesting. The as you can see on the lower left-hand side there, 72% of lawyers we had polled said that freeing up legal staff time to do other work was the big priority for them. 70% kind of talked about alerts, alerts the lawyer to various different deadlines. It kind of picks us out of the contract automatically. That's pretty important as well, because again, you don't want to be missing billing deadlines. And then again, that third part, Matt, that you talked about was 60% of the survey recipients had actually kind of stated that, the capability of working from anywhere was a pretty big factor for them. So that was good.
Yeah, and anecdotally on that last point, and it's the point that Matt raised too. It was brought home to me earlier in the year, basically the beginning of the pandemic. I was chatting to a GC colleague, and he shared with me that he had asked his folks to do the force majeure analysis that everybody's tried to do, and he needed it pretty quickly. And some of their contracts were online, so they could do that remotely, but a large chunk of their contracts are only available in the office. They only had hard copies of the contracts, and that was a material issue for those folks, because they were simply not able to get into the building. It was physically barred to them. So, and he had then had to go basically with a substandard, pseudo assessment. So that access piece it remains important, but maybe Matt, one of the issues is that with cloud-based solutions, the inherent nature of the collateral in the cloud does make it much more readily accessible. We've got some great questions, and we'll one about building the business case from Rod, and another one about integration, which we'll get to later. Please do keep on asking us questions as we go through. So I'm very keen to see questions for our team and panel today. Okay, so Charles, back to you then. What's the takeaway?
Yeah, so some of the takeaways also, again, just kind of still on that, the research, one of the interesting and important factors out of this research was really saying, hey, how do I get stakeholder support? And again, that is super, super important, because without stakeholder support, then you've got nothing, and you're going to stay where you are, and you're just not going to have a system. So, and that was kind of interesting, because again, 55% of the respondents came back and said improving the business ROI was really the key. And, this isn't the first research that's really kind of focusing in on that. So it's that concept of changing from a cost center to a value center. So I do think that that has to be your pitch. That has to be kind of the direction you take on that. And I think I've got, oh yeah. And in fact, if I looked through some other research from Gartner fairly recently over the past year, they also kind of went out and they talked to a lot of different executives and said, okay, what does it take? Or sorry, the first piece there on the left-hand side is about legal automation. And they wanted to say, how many of the legal automation systems that were put into place actually hit their ROI? And what you can see there is 89% of those, the recipients of that study had said that their organization either met or exceeded the ROI from their expectation. And that's for legal automation in general. So it's not necessarily contract automation only, but it certainly includes that. And on the right-hand side, very important stat there, 73% of executives said that they were very or extremely open to these investments. So again, I think the important aspect out of this is, one, chances are that if you set the ROI, if you talk to your vendor properly, you try to kind of really understand what's going on, and then do a little bit of homework internally, set what your expected ROIs are, legal automation pays. And it just makes sense for the organization. In efficiency, in effectiveness, in bringing some bottom line dollars to the equation as well. So chances are that actually you're going to hit your ROI target, which is really important. And the second thing is, believe that other executives are actually ready to support this. If you can show a good business case, if you can show the numbers behind it, then some of the other executives at the table are going to stand up and support this and say, yes, this makes sense. Let's push this forward. So again, it's really important not to feel that you're always snookered into a corner or painted into a corner to feel that, oh well, we're a cost center only. Nobody's ever going to invest here. That's not true. That's not the case. In fact, there's a lot of interest in investing in this area.
So Charles, let me bring in the question from Rod then.
Yes.
It's a good one. So here's the opportunity. Rod says, we're finalizing 2021 budgets right now, and companies are banking on the great, general and administration savings that they've had in 2020 due to no travel, no physical conferences, no seminars, great virtual summits from World Commerce and Contracting aside. Plug, and budgeting those same savings into 2021 now, not because they're optimistic about the end of the pandemic, but because we're benefiting from these savings right now. Mm-hmm. So Rod says that he's looking at it as an opportunity to drive discussions on efficiencies from new tools to help drive even greater cost savings.
Yes.
So that's on the cost to serve, pushing that down.
Right.
And then take some of the G&A savings, the general administrative savings, and then use those to reinvest them for greater efficiency opportunities in both people, process, and the tools themselves. Yeah. My question, I guess, is that a model that works, do you think?
Oh, I think actually that's a brilliant idea. In fact, one of the things that we've been asking a lot of customers who we've been chatting with, and frankly, I'll tell you, in the next month or so, we are in fact planning to put out another white paper on this topic, is looking at the crisis and saying, how do we step out of this crisis in better shape than we stepped into it? And mm-hmm. Is there an opportunity hidden in this crisis that we could really take advantage of? So I think what you just laid out, Paul, I mean, that suggestion of saying, yeah, this is the time to kind of lay that out and say, hey, look, we have saved on a bunch of different G&A expenses, on travel expenses, on kind of using, having people working remotely. Maybe the future holds saying, well, do I need as many office spaces as I did in the past? Maybe we can save a little bit of money there because we do some office sharing, and part of the time is that people are at home. But at the same time, make sure that you're also including in that equation saying, now, how do I indoctrinate that in the organization? How do we kind of solidify this? How do we standardize this? And that actual answer is, because a lot of organizations today have been just hunkering down. They said, well, whatever, this is the case we're in, we have to exist in it, we have to just kind of go with it and, bear with it and grin, or bear and grin, I suppose is the word. But I think going forward, the importance is going to be to say, no, this is actually, let's take some of that G&A, let's invest in legal automation in digitization, in that digital transformation journey to make us more effective and efficient on an ongoing basis, that it's not just a one-time event. And I think, early on, I think everybody was kind of thinking, I know I certainly was, that, oh, yeah, we've got this virus going around. It'll probably be a month or two and we're going to be right back at it. Well, that hasn't happened. We've been at this for a while now, and that's a little bit scary. And the scarier part is to think, hopefully there's a vaccine around the corner. Hopefully there's some new medications which are going to improve things. But what if it takes longer than we expected? Because so far it's taken longer than we expected. So in that case, we really do want to be prepared for this and prepare for the future as well.
Sure.
So good. And with that, in fact, if I might invite Steve to give us a perspective from Inmarsat to say, here's a company that has done exactly that, is looking at internally and saying, how do we prepare so that we are better coming out of the crisis than we were going in? Steve.
Thanks, Charles. So I think it's probably worth reflecting upon what happened in the last financial crisis when everyone pulled back all of their spending. And it was actually those companies that were spending money, were being innovative and driving things forward, were the ones that actually sustained that situation pretty well. And Inmarsat is a big believer of that, of continuous progressing all the time and continuous improvement. So I'll do my little sales pitch on Inmarsat, and then I'll talk about what we've done in contract operations. So as a business, we have 14 satellites currently up in space in what's called the GEO orbits, and we specialize in providing connectivity and communication to customers on a worldwide basis. So pretty cool stuff, right? Pretty innovative. There's not a huge number of companies out there. I know there's some US guys as well, but we won't talk about them. Based in the UK, previously in NGO, and we've been around for 41 years. And kind of the common thread of all our customers on land, sea and air are customers that need real-time data, potentially lots of data, to be able to allow them to make critical decision-making in pretty much real time. So to give you an example, one day we could be drafting, negotiating contracts for a fleet of aircraft that need data for air traffic controllers, to be able to plot where they all are and make sure there's nothing going on. And then the next day we could be negotiating a contract for providing crew services on board vessels that spend their life out on sea, to allow that crew connectivity to their friends and loved ones through WhatsApp, Netflix, and so forth. So Inmarsat's pretty broad with that spectrum, and as a team, contract operations fits within a commercial. It's procurement in commercial, and there's legal as well. And there's about 30 of us, and we negotiate roughly 500 contracts a year, and contract operations, we are kind of forward-leaning. We work with the sales team to put in commercial deals in place. We are a pretty agile team of 6. So, that's kind of us as a company. We turn over roughly $1.8 billion. We have 1,500 employees, and we have about 20 plus different sites around the world to be able to connect to our customers directly and indirectly through our distribution network as well. So if you can move on.
Just before we move off that, Steve, I'm sure folks will ask if I don't ask, but in terms of the contracts that you work, is it predominantly your own paper? Is it third-party paper, or is it a bit of a mix?
Yeah, so it all depends upon the leverage you have in the market. So where we're working with the smaller players or distributors, we have significant amount of leverage in the market. So we can use our terms to some extent. Obviously, you have some of the bigger distributors that are bigger than us, in which case, they have quite a lot of clout about what they can do on terms. And then when we are coming to negotiate with companies that are kind of big direct customers and who can go anywhere, because pretty much connectivity is almost in some respects a commodity now, because there are so many providers. They will have more leverage when they go to markets, and we will have to draft and negotiate bespoke terms. So it's a real mix between the two, and the idea is to work out kind of who has more leverage and who has the better contracting terms based upon the services that you're providing. Luckily, in our case, a lot of our customers don't have terms that provide for satellite connectivity. So in a lot of our terms, we can actually put forward our terms.
Okay, thank you.
I would say I've worked at a big US defense contractor as well, and the same applies there as well. The same applies here actually. So you'd have customers with government end users. Well, look, they're not going to accept your terms no matter how hard you try and push them. So, for example, I'm working on a big defense contract now where we are going to have to accept, into some degree, the customer's terms, but make a pragmatic decision about how we accept them and what risk mitigation factors we put in place. So, for example, do we redline the contract, which may mark us down in the bidding and the scoring, or do we put appropriate insurances in place to cover us, but then you have the cost allocated to that as well. So there's always a kind of a pros to cons to every style there. So, talking about kind of what we've done with our contract digital evolution, we put together what's called Project Streamline, so a bit quirky there. And there's a few things we're kind of trying to look at when we put this together. So, as I said, Inmarsat set up in 1979. We've been around for 41 years, and we've had quite a few mergers and acquisitions during that time. So as a result, we've bought order books, we've bought customers on board, and we've had very, very varying different terms and conditions. And as a result, from an operational perspective, the company couldn't really operate concisely and together. We would have one set of conditions over here, which would say, these are your age debt provisions. If you pay late, we'd have another set of age debt provisions over here, allowing us different rights. We'd have different rights about what they're allowed to sell and who they're allowed to sell to and who they're allowed to provision it to and their own resellers, and then different notice rights. So when we holistically looked at it, we had like 12 different templates and 12 different types of contracts for effectively the same thing. And it meant there was a lot of operational mess within the business. So we took a look at that from a structural perspective to say, look, what do we need to do to ease the customer footprint? So when they come on the journey with us to become onboarded, they have the easiest passage through our business. So for us, we looked at a number of different things. So we took a look at driving operational and commercial efficiencies by using smart technologies and platforms. And we'll talk about, I've got a slide regarding ContractPodAi and a contract management system, but there are really good contract management systems out there. And if you don't have one, this is a great time to start investing in one. We had a look at simplifying our contracting framework and reducing the large number of templates down to a simple template that was agreeable for both sides. And I'll talk about kind of the processes we went through that, because that was a big piece of work that enabled our success down the road. And then we've implemented, we'll talk about the contract management system that has built-in AI, and this helps to save time downstream from us, especially from the reporting perspective, and that allows us to free up that time to spend it on better value-added services to the business. So, helping with the bid management and the commercial forefront, and some of my colleagues on the procurement savings front, and that itself pays for itself back in terms of the money invested of an ROI perspective. And then we had a look at our processes to say, are our processes best fit for what we're trying to achieve? So we took a look at it from a kind of a lean perspective, and we had a lean practitioner in to help look at our processes. And then again, we helped to kind of step that forward. So I think it's probably worth touching upon some of the challenges that we faced coming to this project. So, first of all, we're pretty much we're a pretty old company in some respects. So, over 40 years old. As I said, we've had lots of mergers and acquisitions, and we had thousands of customers that we had to onboard, and with different varying contracts. Now, if you've got this number of contracts, trying to find all those different contracts is difficult if you don't have a proper contract management system. And the other difficulty is if they've had different contracts over time, and they've had contracts with companies that we've bought, you then have a divergence on terms that are potentially conflicting each other as well. So we had to kind of strip that apart and work out who was assigned to what terms and do it so forth that way. And then, finding those contracts was difficult in some instances, and pretty much soul destroying in a lot of instances. And I'm pretty sure we've all been through there where we've had to try and find a contract and you're racking your brains as to what folder it might well be kept in, or was it sent to Joe Bloggs over here, who's now left the company 4 years ago. It can be really tough sometimes, and you can spend a lot of time and effort trying to locate the source of truth. And then finally, spending the time to articulate why to the customer it's in their best interest to renegotiate a contract. Now, that's a difficult piece to do because a customer most of the time will say, well, look, I've got a contract. I don't need to have anything else with you guys. Why spend the effort of trying to put in a new contract? Well, there are some efficiencies for them as well that you have to try and demonstrate the value add for them as well long term, because there is an element of cost from their perspective. Charles, if you could move one on. So now we'll kind of talk about the how side of things. So we looked at 3 core different areas, and a bit of a shout out to Paul here, but the World Commerce and Contracting, formerly IACCM, has some really good best practice ideas. And I'll be honest, I kind of cherry picked some of them and used my experience on some of them and spoke to some colleagues over here in there. And we kind of broke it down into 3 core areas, being people, process, and technology. So from a people perspective, we realized pretty quick we needed a senior executive sponsor for this project. And that helped create alignment within the business. Any senior management layer, they always have conflicting different interests. So the higher your sponsor, the better it will be for your project, so that you can get your word in terms of how effective your project will be and the impact it will be to the business. And I can't stress enough is that if you've got a big project that you're going through, really get involved with senior management executives as soon as possible. We also implemented a tiger team, and so we cherry-picked people from different departments that have interactions with the customer or from an operational perspective. So we picked someone from billing, we picked someone from product group, we picked someone from kind of the aged debt side of the business, and obviously sales and commercial. And we had this tiger team who were empowered by their own departments to make decisions quickly and timely. And it allowed us, because we led the project, it allowed us to make decisions pretty snappy. As opposed to keep going back to the business time and time again for different approvals, we had these empowered individuals who could make snappy decisions. And at the end of the day, the contract is there. It's just to formalize the commercial operations between one company and the next. Now, if you don't understand how that operational perspective works, it doesn't matter how good your contract is. Effectively, you haven't got a good contract of work in place. And then we took a look at a process perspective. So we took a look at our bottlenecks in the process, and we have a process which is called lead to cash, and we took each of the different steps in that process to determine where are the bottlenecks in each of these processes, and how do we make it more efficient so that we streamline all that across. So we also took a look at from an MSA competitive analysis perspective to say, what's the market doing? What's our competitors doing? And we took a look at from an internal position to say, well, what are the main contractual terms that are negotiated on a consistent basis, and can we be a bit easier on them? And then we kind of sought ideas from the business about what tools and processes we could have in place. And we put together a kind of clause library where we would then allow people within the team to self-approve certain areas within kind of agreed parameters. And all of these areas help speed up the contract negotiation perspective. And then from a tools perspective, and I really can't kind of strongly suggest this enough, is that look at what smart tools there are. So we managed to implement a customer-facing portal, and on that portal, it has everything the customer's looking for from an operational perspective. So it'll have about what the product does, what the features are of that product. It will have the pricing on there. It will have policies on there as well. And the nice thing about this is that from our perspective, it meant that we didn't have to incorporate this into a really big contract. We could just give them access on a bespoke basis to their portal details and keep that portal updated in real time. Customers loved it because it meant that from an operational perspective, they didn't need to send their contract to their operational guys. They could just give them the portal details. And we love it because it allows us to streamline our contracts, and it allows us to make updates a lot easier than going through amendments.
So Steve, just a quick question from Sachin. He asks, what's the average time for an organization to implement AI-based contract management? So how long did it take you to, let's use you as a data point, how long did it take you to do your implementation, roughly?
Yeah, so you've got to take a few things with a pinch of salt here. So when we took a look at it, we had over 10,000 contracts and 100,000 documents to migrate across. And we are a fairly complex business in terms of the number of customers we have as well. So it's really going to determine upon kind of those two criteria.
Mhm.
I think on reflection, it's probably taken us a good 3 months to integrate properly and migrate things properly. And it will take us at least another few months to really understand the system. So I would say end to end, before you're really comfortable with a system, you've had people onboarded, you've trained them up, you've run the reports, it's going to take you at least 6 months, realistically, right? There's always going to be gaps within the implementation phase at some point. So to be realistic, you probably want to build in 6 months worth of preparation time.
Great, thank you. Okay, onto the what.
Onto the what, yes. So I guess in terms of kind of what we achieved, so for us, streamlining the contract was the biggest achievement. You know, if you're a customer perspective and the first thing you're seeing is 60 pages worth of contracts, you're going to lose the will to live pretty quickly. So we managed to streamline that down to 22 pages. And we've also made the contract fairer and more equitable based upon our research going to market and what were hotly contested clauses. And then it means that customers are less frequently negotiating with us because it's a fairer, more mutual position. We would mostly concede those points anyway. So why don't we just do it up front? And that saves a lot of more time and enables customers to get onboarded quicker, to bring in revenue quicker as well. And then the other thing is to think about is, who is your audience? Now, as I said earlier, Inmarsat works on a worldwide basis. We have over 20 different offices around the world of over 4,000 customers. A lot of those customers, English is not their first language. And Microsoft has a little tool built into Microsoft Word called the Flesh Reading Ease Score. And if you can go on Google and set how to set it all up and go on to spelling and grammar. And at the end of that, it will give you a readout to say, how easy is your contract to read? Now, all the contracts previously that we had to read, and I should give you some background. This score goes from 0 to 100. 0 means it's effectively impossible to read, and 100 means that someone in the 5th grade could read and understand what it meant. So they do say that most contracts are kind of in like the 20s and 30s. What we found was that our legacy agreements, they were in their teens and middle teens, and that is because we used a lot of legalese language that wasn't easily interpreted by a lot of non-native English speakers, which meant there was a lot of questions that came back to us that drove a lot of time, etc. So when we redrafted this, we had this in mind, and yes, the contract has all the proper legalese in there. But now, when we run the same test again on Microsoft Word, it goes into the mid-30s. And although it's nowhere near kind of 60 to 90, I feel that it's right in the sweet spot where it's fully understood by our counterparts, and so doesn't press a lot of questions that burn up a lot of time, versus being obviously true to our form in terms of a contract style.
And certainly, a lot of our research shows it's really also important, Steve, to be easy to understand from the people that have to implement it in the future. Okay, so
spot on, absolutely spot on. Because remember, when we've done the contract negotiation, and we pop the champagne, we've got the sparklers out, it then goes over to the operational team who actually have to decipher what we've written down. The easier it is to decipher from an operational perspective, the easier the contract is likely to flow between the parties. So we have to be conscious downstream as to where that contract's going to go. It's not just put in a cupboard somewhere and then wait it out.
Totally. So let's take a look at your results. What happened?
Yeah. So we looked at kind of implementing 14 different efficiencies that would help streamline our process. We implemented a customer-facing portal to give them 24 access to our policies and procedures and pricing. And now it allows them to transpose that pricing information into their own ERP systems, where previously pricing was all based on a contract. Now, if you're that poor guy that has to copy out all those lines of text of pricing from a contract into their ERP system, you're probably going to lose the will to live somewhere along the line. So we're trying to make it really easy for customers to be able to use us as a provider. And then we looked at how many contracts we negotiate. So we roughly negotiate about 500 contracts a year. And we realized that through the following steps down on the process perspective, we would save roughly 2 days per contract, which equates to 1,000 man days And there you go, that's your ROI. So it allowed us now to kind of focus our time on strategic work. And we've also managed to reduce the number of notices that go out to customers for updates to contracts, and also improve the time that's spent on there as well. So they're kind of the main results that we managed to get out of it. So Paul, I think there's some kind of polling that's been done about this from World Commerce and Contracting.
There's certainly we have statistics that support these sorts of benefits. You've shared a lot bottom up, Steve, which is really what our members like to see, because these are real, hard numbers. Top down, though, based on our research, is quite compelling. In that 9.2% on average of the top line revenue is left on the table as a consequence of ineffective commercial and contract management every year. 9.2%. Now that's a stunningly large number for a company the size of Inmarsat, for example. Not all of that's going to drop down to the bottom line as a consequence of deploying systems like this. But these are examples of where you're starting to nibble away at that 9.2%. These are cost to serve and cost to quality benefits that are actually deriving business benefit in Inmarsat. Great to see.
Without any doubt. And the deadline notifications are a real strong driver of that, because now the procurement team know when contracts come to expire, and they get to renegotiate a better price for us long term, or like more value added services or better efficiencies. Previously, all that information would generally get lost. Totally.
Okay, so the other thing our guys are really interested in is to show me. Can we take a look at what it looks like in your tool?
Sure. Well, okay, that's going quick. Right. So the first screen talks about our bread and butter, putting a contract in place. So you can use this tool to create a new template, and you can pre-populate a lot of those fields, so that when you'll fill that information in, it'll pre-populate one of those templates you've done already, spit it into the system, and then you can issue it out for redlining to the customer, or if the customer's really brave, issue it out for signature. And that's a nice piece that's already built in, so it's got that full audit trail. And then the second screen, you can run a number of different reports regarding the information built in. So if you think you're collecting all this meta information about those contracts, so expiry date, effective date, is it an evergreen, and who are the parties, and so forth. And from that information, you can then capture it and run a number of reports, which is key to the third slide. I'm not sure if you can see it, but these are about key obligations. Now, ContractPodAi, when we migrated our contracts across, they ran it through their AI system, and we are doing this for all new contracts as well. And the AI system has a built-in piece of functionality where it takes a look at key obligations you specify. So it could be limitation of liability, or the warranty clause, or the Incoterm, or what indemnities am I providing, or what's my max cap liability. And in here, it will give you a snippet from the clause, and it will list it out. And if you recall what I talked about, the metadata information, all of that information is now in the system, so you can report on it. So I'll give you an example. Before this system, I had to take a look at our top 5 customers and look at their age debt provisions. It took me 3 days to do that work, because in the end, I found there was 40 different contracts in place. The idea of this AI reporting is that you can, with one simple report, it will pull together that key obligations piece and spit it into a format that you look. Yes, you'll have to review it to make sure it's completely accurate, but it will save you a lot of time long term. And that's what we're looking for. And then the final piece is the dashboard. And the dashboard for us gives us a presentation about what contracts we have in place, which are coming up to expiry. And then it breaks it down by territory as well. We can even see from a sales perspective what territories we should be going for next.
Great, Matt. That's really good. It's great to see how a tool like this can support you and the business. Great stuff. So I think what we'll do is we've got some really let's do the poll first, then we'll go to the questions. We've got some meaty questions, so if there are questions that you still have that haven't been asked yet, please do share them with us. But let's run this quick poll first. What do you feel is the most important when it comes to transforming your contract management process? Steve has very clearly articulated the benefits and the drivers for him, some of which appear on this list, but I'll be really interested to see your feedback. So senior leadership buy-in, that stakeholder engagement, communicate, that continued communication, the use and application of technology, project role, the rollout plan, buy-in from the business team, using internal champions for adoption. Steve very clearly talked about those tiger teams. We're going to come back to that in a question in a minute. Seamless integration across the enterprise. Please do, Carla, let's close the poll and see and take a look at the results. Yeah, I'm 39%. Our research supports this as well. Stakeholder engagement, or particularly the lack of it, is one of the key pitfalls, as we say, around these sorts of deployments. And then the buy-in from not only from the business teams, but also from the wider community, critically important. And that communicate. Okay, really interesting. What I'm going to use that as a foil for a couple of questions, though. So these are really to Matt and Steve. So Carla, if you wouldn't mind putting the slide just back up just for a second, the poll slide. One of those issues, I think it was 17%. Yeah, 17% down the bottom. Seamless integration across the enterprise. We've got a question here from Saulo about integration with ERP systems. We've got a question on deck from Alexander around integration into the project management suite. What's your take on that? How important is integration into back office systems for this CLM suite?
So, Steve from Inmarsat, so I would say it depends upon your business. I would be hesitant personally about integration into an ERP system, mainly for the fact what costs is it going to provide and what benefits is it going to deliver. But if your if your company is providing lots of different widgets and you want to, contracts behind it, maybe that would be a good ROI for you. I can't speak on that behalf, but I can just imagine the costs involved of implementing something like that would be pretty high and pretty bespoke to your use services. And then you've got to think about, from a software perspective, are you creating a build software that's going to be really unsupportable in the future? But I think there is really good ideas about implementing into some of your back office. So, for example, we're integrating ContractPodAi into Salesforce, and this is our sales pipeline, so that we understand what business is coming through. We can pipeline it, and then we can assign it accordingly. And then the sales guys can see the contracts. It might work well from a project perspective if you do lots of big projects, so to keep the project manager in tune. But I think it's worthwhile just having a sit down and think about, from your business perspective, what are the systems it should integrate to, and what value you add by doing that? Because there will be a cost and there will be risk associated by doing so.
Yeah, certainly what we've seen, Charles, I'll be interested in your insight too, but a year or two ago, a monolithic CLM tool that wasn't integrated into anything was okay. Now, definitely not. And the barriers to integration, to Steve's point previously, were expensive, were significant. But now the cost of integration, particularly the availability of these open APIs into many of the common platforms, now enables us to share data amongst these platforms much more readily than was otherwise the case. We have about a couple more minutes left. So, Charles, any thoughts on that one particularly? And then
well, actually, if I might bounce that over to Matt. Matt, you actually are responsible for the team that does a lot of integrations. What's your perspective?
Well, I was thinking, Charles. I mean, I was thinking it's very interesting, because one of the a lot of the teams that create paper or create contracts are sales guys. For example, if you're an outward-facing business, and if you can standardize that, which is the use case for a number of businesses that we've seen, that if you can you don't need to give the sales guys the integration actually right into a CLM. If you can allow them to use their existing system like Salesforce that they currently use, if they can then just have some additional features, functionality via that, then you're expanding this to the business, which I think goes back to the seamless integration across the enterprise sort of comment in from the people here, because actually that allows the business to use it, allows the business users to use the functionality of a contract management system without even necessarily realizing that they're using it, which I think can be of huge value to everyone involved.
Great, thank you. Charles, any closing thoughts from you? We're coming to the end of our time today.
Yes, definitely. Hang on a second. Just one reminder to the audience, again, what we saw really kind of jumping out from the research that we are about to send out to everybody tomorrow, that we're officially launching then, is that 85% believe that AI-based contract management software would provide benefits. And clearly, you know, Steve's helped kind of articulate a couple, great example, great case study from Inmarsat, really kind of exemplifying pieces of this as well, to say, yes, it is actually providing a benefit to the organization, helping the efficiency of the legal team, and just improving the contract processes overall. And again, remember also that Gartner study that we referred to earlier, 73% of executives are extremely open to supporting this type of investment. So again, you know, don't be shy about asking and about putting your hand up and saying, how are we going to come out of this opportunity, or sorry, out of this crisis? Or rather, think from the perspective of what is the opportunity in this crisis to actually improve the team going forward. And again, just remember, tomorrow we will be launching the research. This is what it looks like. We will be doing some PR press around it. I think it's pretty important stuff. And we are also going to make sure that a copy gets out to everybody who has been attending this webinar. So look for that in your inbox. And with that, I know that we've gone through a couple of Q&As. One of the other last things that I'll remind everybody too is, since we were talking about integration stuff, is when you are talking with your vendors about a system like this, talk to them about whether there's a phased opportunity to deploy, whether there's a quick deploy option, because that is very important. Get the organization while strike while the iron is hot, and make sure to kind of build momentum for your system and your solution. So again, talk to us. If you're chatting with us, great. Ask us about the quick deploy option. It's there. I mean, we can get a system up and operating in 10 days. And again, do a phased deployment so that you'll get the full system in 3 months or whatever it takes. So with that, again, thank you so much. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this conversation.
Indeed. And thank you to our audience today. Your participation in this, and particularly the questions that you've asked. Really good stuff. And my personal thanks to Charles, to Steve, and to Matt for contributing to our session today. We didn't get to all the questions, so I apologize for that. We will, however, be responding to those questions through email, so wait out for those. So it just remains for me to say thank you to our audience, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, panel. Really good session. Thank you.
See you all.
Thank you.